Hi guys, my name is Yavi Silvers, and today we're going to be talking about nuclear energy, nuclear power, and nuclear waste, and whether or not nuclear energy is worth the risk. So what is nuclear energy? Well, nuclear energy is derived from splitting atoms in a reactor to heat water into steam and turn into turbines to generate electricity. This process is manifested through nuclear power plants using nuclear reactors to release and generate heat without CO2 emissions. Nuclear power comes from nuclear fusion and nuclear fission. Nuclear fission of uranium plays a colossal role in producing the majority of the electricity. So what are some of the pros of nuclear energy? Well, no CO2 emissions. It's a clean energy source. Actually, nuclear power plants avoid more than 470 million metric tons of CO2 each year. It's also a reliable source of energy. More than 20% of U.S.'s energy comes from the nuclear power plants. Therefore, it is reliable. It also produces new jobs. And if you can see the graph all the way in the right corner, the right top corner, it shows you the GDP of Sweden from the ranges of 1990 to 2013. Actually, in early 1990s, Sweden began to use nuclear energy, and this propelled their GDP substantially. As you can see, Sweden's GDP grew by 58%, and GDP stands for gross domestic product. It's a monetary measure of market value of all the final goods and services produced in a specific time period, and this time period is between 1990 and 2013. And as you can see, as their GDP grew, their CO2 emissions decreased substantially, approximately 23%. And this shows you that it produces new jobs, and since they have a reliable source of energy, they're able to do better, and that raises their GDP. And also a stable base load, meaning that it actually stores a lot more energy than solar and other forms of electricity, and therefore it makes it reliable and it can hold a lot more energy. Also, it costs less to operate compared to fossil fuel plants. It is the the cost is significantly less, but also less death compared to fossil fuel plants. This is because, as you can see right here, the death rate from accidents of air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, coal is the leader, oil and natural gas. And as you can see, nuclear energy is third to last behind solar and wind. It's actually the safest one of all three. And less deaths from fossil fuel plants because fossil fuel plants result in more death because they are huge contributors to climate change. No air pollution, no death from air pollution, and that's why you see nuclear power plants is 4% of global energy, but the deaths are in the 0.07%. Also, nuclear energy and nuclear power plants using nuclear power plants instead of coal has prevented 2 million deaths and will prevent almost 8 million more. Also, you might ask, what are some of the cons of nuclear energy because it can't be this good? Well, you are right. Nuclear power plants produce radioactive waste. And what are we going to do with that radioactive waste? As you can see in the map over here, it shows you that all the blue dots are the commercial sites of nuclear power plants. And I live in Illinois, so Illinois is bombarded with all nuclear waste, and we have been deciding where we're going to put that waste. And not we as in me, but we as in the United States government have decided to place in the Yucca Mountain in Nevada, but states like Texas and movements like NIMBY, which stands for Not in My Backyard, oppose nuclear waste or the whereabouts of the waste. A nuclear mountain Yucca Mountain in Nevada built a 5-mile tunnel to serve as a deep geological respiratory designed to serve as a store of high-level radioactive waste. And after approximately $15 billion were invested in this project in 2010, the Obama administration stop the licensing process, preventing the facility from receiving any waste. Despite this, the Trump administration was planning on opening it, but Texas, like I said, sued several federal agencies, claiming that the federal government had violated the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. And the main concern of this is that it's 100 miles away from Las Vegas, and that is not safe for the humans. Las Vegas is a very high tourist site, and it will decrease tourism. And the state gets most of its money from Las Vegas, and storing radioactive stuff nearby would be bad for the economy because it will prevent people from going there. It's also a threat. There accidents. There have been a lot of accidents. The most notable ones are the 3 Mile Island, which was an event that took place in the U.S., particularly in Pennsylvania, on March 28, 1979, considered as the most serious nuclear power plant accident in the U.S. history, and its aftermath drastically and forever changed the discussions of nuclear power as a clean energy source in America and perhaps in the world. There's also Chernobyl, which is an accident that was detrimental to life in the region as it released massive amounts of radioactivity into the air and into the environment. And the USSR, or the Soviet government, was not open to the people, and approximately 600,000 people were going to clean it up, and its effects are still affecting people today. Also, another notable one is the power plant in Fukushima Daiichi, where a tsunami took place and an earthquake that led to the failure of the power plant, and that resulted in high emissions of radioactivity into the environment, and approximately 19,000 people died from the tsunami, and tsunami coupled with the earthquake led to the failure of the power plant. Also a threat to national security. As you can see all the way in the right corner, a picture of a person blowing up. This is because we're providing terrorists, national terrorists, domestic terrorists, or global terrorists easy access to nuclear material, and which can kill human life in splits of a second. So we need to think about the security and making these facilities and power plants very secure, because if we have nuclear material laying around for everybody to use, that would be detrimental to life on Earth. It's also quite expensive to build, and according to the Spring Power and Gas, it takes approximately an estimated $4 to $9 billion to construct them. So it's actually very expensive, and we don't really know who's going to fund these. It's also not environmentally friendly because the process of mining and refining uranium hasn't been clean, and actually transporting nuclear fuel to and from plants involves pollution hazard. Also, once the fuel is used, you can't simply take it and just leave it in the land. It's radioactive and it's dangerous. So, and that's why people are saying we can't use this, because we don't want radioactive material laying around and it's detrimental to life. It's also not a renewable energy source like solar and like wind and like hydro. So yeah, these are some of the cons of nuclear energy. Even though there are pros like no CO2 emissions, produces new jobs, and costs less to operate, and it's a reliable energy source, we can use this temporarily to advance us to a time where humans can actually produce a renewable energy source and advance wind and solar so they can store more energy, because as of right now, we can't store energy. We don't have batteries to store energy into from solar, and we need to work on that. But I personally don't believe that nuclear energy is the answer to climate change, but it can be an answer to climate change. We can include it because we can use it temporarily, advancing us to the next stage of life. And as we get more advanced in the future, we can use other methods of other sources of energy where they can help us put the climate issue into rest. Thank you very much.
Okay, now we're going to talk about how these events or how nuclear reactor events have impacted our world. Our world. So in March 26, 1979, reacted at 3 Mile Island, reactor 2 overheated and damaged the core of the reactor. The government spent $1 million on cleanup and decided in 1993 they sufficiently cleaned up the mess. Uh, they were There was an increase in cancer from 1979 to 1985 from people who lived within 10 miles of the reactor. People were evacuated within 20 miles, a 20-mile radius, but most returned within 3 weeks to a cancer-causing environment. On April 26, 1986, in Chernobyl, during a safety test, they found a flaw. There was a blackout. There was a blackout, and there was a gap when the backup power would not turn on for about 1 minute after a blackout. This was flagged as an issue. As it kept testing, there was an operating shift that caused operators to be unprepared. During the fourth test, the power dropped to zero, causing a nuclear chain reaction. This caused an explosion and for radiation to be released. The government did nothing about it and tried to keep it as a secret from the public. The Russian government lied to the people by trying to cover up any evidence of the event by labeling any document related to it as classified. They claimed that the error was fine, which it wasn't, which was exactly a lie. But they did not inform the people that the food supply was contaminated, causing cancer. The most heartbreaking result of this is the kids developing cancer because radiation contaminated the food, including mainly milk that kids drank. This recorded thousands of deaths, and the whole area surrounding Chernobyl was is inhabited today, including the closest city called Pripyat. The most recent example was in March 11th, 2011, in Fukushima, Japan. The reactors were highly damaged because of an earthquake. This caused the reactors to leak radiation. The reactors were decided not to restart, and the reactor by political decision. They dealt with this situation fairly well and evacuated about 154 people, but the estimate of deaths is only about 1,500 to 1,800. But this was mainly caused by the tsunami and not because of the exposed radiation. What can we learn from these disasters? Well, with technology today, we are able to develop and predict multiple possibilities of failure. Chernobyl is a good example of what happens when we do not prepare. Also, in today's world, we understand how how the world works and where fault lines lay. The events of Fukushima, Japan, showed how the developers overlooked the importance of a location. Even though there was a slim possibility of an earthquake and tsunami occurring, all scenarios should have been thought of because of how dangerous nuclear technology is. The lack of care of the people in 3 Mile Island in Chernobyl highlights a severe issue with nuclear reactors. The original evacuation radius was resized multiple times and allowed the people to return within a short period of time. The result of this left many people to get illnesses related to nuclear radiation. These deaths could have been prevented if each government was more generous of the size of the blast radius and decided when it was safe to return. This also being transparent helps as well, and not lying to the people.
There are many alternative energy sources or power plants such as solar energy, wind energy, and hydropower. But just because they are safer or uh, like they're safer or cleaner than nuclear energy does not mean they are better. Renewable energy is much less efficient and generates a lot less power than nuclear energy does. And renewable energies are not always functional. For example, solar panels don't work when you don't have any sunlight. Windmills don't work without wind, and if a dam was frozen over, then the hydropower you wouldn't be able to generate any power from the dam. In conclusion, nuclear energy is not worth the risk yet. Permanent disposal of nuclear waste is needed. Right now, there is no way to permanently dispose of nuclear waste. And this is the biggest problem because nuclear waste can remain radioactive for up to 10,000 years. And then the nuclear plants will also need to be better protected against threats such as terrorist groups attempting to either blow up or extract nuclear material for their own use. And then one way we could get to nuclear energy being worth the risk is learning from our past mistakes and the shortcuts that were taken, like the ones that were taken at Chernobyl. And then renewable sources or renewable energy sources are just not efficient enough to power a country by itself. Nuclear plants will be needed, and if we are to lower the CO2 emissions. And yeah.
Thank you.
All right, are we done?
How do I stop the recording? I think that's it.